Somewhere in the darkness of the Ice Age, a single human walks too far from the fire. The wind is rising, wolves are already watching from beyond the snow, and in a world without roads, cities, or safety, being alone may be the most dangerous mistake a person can make. For hundreds of thousands of years, ancient hunters crossed frozen plains, deadly forests, and empty continents together, not out of friendship alone, but because isolation often meant death. Tonight, we follow the forgotten journeys of the first humans who survived the ancient world side by side. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. The tracks appear first in wet ground beside a vanished river, a line of human footprints pressed into ancient mud, hardened by sun, buried by sediment, and hidden for tens of thousands of years before erosion reveals them again. Some are large and deep, others belong to children. One set suddenly changes direction, as though the walker noticed something nearby and hesitated. Then the tracks continue together toward distant grasslands, where nothing remains now except wind and stone. No voices survive or no names, only the unsettling pattern itself. Nobody walks alone. Far beyond the edges of written history, before cities, before kings, before roads tied continents together, movement defines human existence. Entire generations live while travelling. They sleep in temporary shelters beside rivers that later disappear, beneath cliffs that eventually collapse, under skies untouched by smoke or electric light. The world they move through is beautiful in ways difficult to imagine now, but it is also unforgiving. Every horizon hides uncertainty. Every valley may contain food or death. Every journey carries the possibility that someone simply vanishes and is never seen again. A single human body is remarkably fragile in this world. Bare skin tears easily. Teeth struggle against raw hide and frozen meat. Human beings cannot outrun wolves, overpower cave lions, or survive long exposure in winter storms without shelter or fire. Even healthy adults can die from an infected cut, a twisted ankle, or several nights without water. Yet despite this weakness, humans spread across deserts, mountains, tundra, coastlines, and forests until they occupy nearly every corner of the planet. Archaeologists still debate exactly how quickly this expansion occurred, but one fact remains strikingly clear. Ancient hunters almost never travelled alone. The evidence emerges slowly from caves, campsites, and forgotten pathways. Hearths contain remains from many individuals gathered together repeatedly over generations. Hunting sites show coordinated movement around prey. Stone tools appear standardized within social groups, suggesting constant teaching and cooperation. Even burial practices hint at close bonds between travelers who depended on one another for survival. Again and again, the prehistoric record points toward the same conclusion. Isolation is dangerous. Companionship is protection. The reasons begin with predators. In Ice Age Eurasia, humans move through landscapes shared with giant hyenas, cave bears, saber-toothed cats in earlier eras, and packs of wolves large enough to strip carcasses within minutes. American lions stalk open plains in North America. Massive short-faced bears tower over campsites. In parts of Africa, crocodiles wait beside river crossings while lions hunt at dusk beyond tall grass. Ancient humans understand these dangers intimately because they encounter them constantly. A lone traveller carrying meat becomes part of the food chain. The darkness itself is different then. Modern people rarely experience true night anymore. Even isolated towns glow faintly against the horizon. but prehistoric darkness is absolute. Once firelight fades, forests dissolve into blackness so complete that depth and distance disappear entirely. Sound becomes more important than sight. A snapping branch may signal deer, wind, or something hunting nearby. Humans possess excellent endurance and intelligence, but their night vision remains poor compared to many predators. Alone in darkness, a human being becomes vulnerable in deeply primal ways. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. If this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy, what survives in the archaeological record suggests that movement through dangerous territory often follows collective patterns shaped by fear as much as necessity. Small groups travel together not because companionship feels pleasant, but because isolation increases the odds of death. Additional eyes detect threats sooner. More hands maintain fires through cold nights. Injuries become survivable when others help carry supplies or gather food. Even sleep changes in groups. Some remain awake while others rest. The ancient world rarely allows complete safety, but numbers improve the odds. The strange thing is how early this behavior may begin. Evidence from sites associated with Homo erectus suggests coordinated group activity more than 1 million years ago. These early humans already control fire in some regions, already transport stone tools across considerable distances, already cooperate in ways difficult to explain through solitary living alone. Their brains remain smaller than modern humans, yet they succeed across varied environments for astonishing stretches of time. No single explanation fully accounts for this success, though collective survival almost certainly plays a major role. The landscape itself constantly pressures humans toward cooperation. Imagine crossing prehistoric Europe during the last ice age. Wind moves across open tundra, carrying needles of ice sharp enough to burn exposed skin. Herds migrate unpredictably across enormous distances. Rivers freeze, thaw, and flood according to seasons that can shift violently from year to year. Food remains uncertain. Wood for fires grows scarce in some regions. Travelers must remember shelter locations, water sources, migration routes, dangerous valleys, and places where predators gather. Such knowledge cannot easily survive inside one mind alone. It becomes social memory, passed between generations beside campfires. Ancient hunters likely understand something modern societies often forget. A single person may possess skill, courage, or intelligence, but no individual controls enough knowledge to survive every situation alone. One traveller remembers where flint can be found. Another knows safe river crossings during spring floods. Someone else understands animal behavior during migration season. Elderly members who no longer hunt still carry precious memories of droughts, storms, and distant pathways. The group becomes more than protection. It becomes a living archive. This may explain one of the most emotional discoveries in prehistoric archaeology. Certain ancient skeletons belong to individuals who survive severe injuries or disabilities for years, despite conditions that would make solitary life nearly impossible. At sites connected to Neanderthals and early modern humans, researchers find healed fractures, damaged limbs, blindness, tooth loss, and degenerative disease. Some individuals live long after these injuries occur. Survival on that scale strongly implies care from others. One famous Neanderthal skeleton from Shanidar Cave in present-day Iraq shows signs of multiple serious injuries, including blindness in one eye and damage limiting mobility. Yet the individual survives for years afterward. Scholars still debate the full interpretation of the evidence, but many researchers see signs of long-term social support. Someone gathers food, Someone helps maintain warmth. Someone waits while slower members move across rough terrain in a brutal prehistoric world. Compassion itself becomes a survival strategy. The emotional consequences of isolation begin emerging from deep human history here. Fear of abandonment may not simply reflect culture or imagination. It may descend from countless generations for whom separation from the group genuinely increases mortality risk. Even now, many people experience intense discomfort when completely alone in unfamiliar wilderness at night. Rationally, modern forests contain relatively few threats compared to Ice Age ecosystems. Yet, the body still reacts. Heart rate rises, hearing sharpens, shadows feel alive. Ancient instincts remain active beneath modern lives. And there are worse dangers than predators. The further humans spread into unknown territory, the more they encounter other humans competing for the same resources. Long before kingdoms wage organized wars, small bands likely defend hunting grounds fiercely. Evidence of prehistoric violence appears across multiple continents. Skeletons contain spear wounds, crushed skulls, embedded projectile points. Some massacres involve entire groups. The archaeological record remains incomplete, and scholars debate how common such violence truly was. But no ancient traveller could safely assume every stranger meant peace. A lone hunter approaching unfamiliar territory may face impossible calculations. Nearby fires could signal potential allies, trading partners, or deadly rivals. Without shared language or trust, even accidental encounters become dangerous. Groups offer negotiation power. They display strength. They reduce vulnerability. Human cooperation evolves partly because the world contains other humans capable of violence. Yet despite all these dangers, movement never stops. Generation after generation keeps walking into uncertainty. They cross mountain passes during brutal winters. They follow herds into unfamiliar valleys. They skirt coastlines where storms erase camps overnight. Children grow up on these journeys without ever knowing permanent settlement. Entire worlds exist only in motion. The remarkable thing is not that ancient hunters feared travelling alone. The remarkable thing is that they travelled at all. Because somewhere ahead, beyond the next ridge or frozen river, lies survival, or water, or prey, or warmer land, or escape from starvation. Human beings move because staying still can be just as deadly as the journey itself, and so they continue together across landscapes vast enough to swallow entire civilizations long before civilization even exists. The tracks beside the vanished river keep moving forward into silence. At dawn, the camp begins dissolving almost immediately. Fire ash scatters into cold wind. Sleeping furs are rolled and tied with sinew straps darkened by smoke and grease. Stone blades disappear into leather pouches. Children are lifted awake before the sun fully clears the horizon. Nobody wastes movement. These people have repeated the same ritual thousands of times across generations older than memory itself. Staying too long in one place risks hunger. Water sources shrink. Herds migrate elsewhere. Predators learn the smell of human camps. The world rewards movement, but movement alone is not enough. The journey only works because it happens together. Somewhere in eastern Africa, perhaps nearly 2 million years ago, early humans begin drifting beyond the territories familiar to their ancestors. Climate shifts reshape forests into patchworks of woodland and open grassland. Rainfall changes unpredictably. Lakes expand and disappear. Animals move in response, and humans follow them. Fossil evidence suggests that several human species spread outward during these unstable periods, though the exact routes and timing remain debated. What becomes increasingly clear is that cooperation evolves alongside mobility. Groups that move efficiently survive longer than isolated individuals trying to navigate hostile landscapes alone. This transformation changes human life in profound ways. Earlier primates rely heavily on local knowledge tied to relatively stable territories, but migrating hunters face constantly changing environments. A valley rich in water one season may become barren years later. Safe paths can vanish after floods or landslides. Entire ecosystems shift as temperatures rise or fall. Under these conditions, memory shared across many individuals becomes extraordinarily valuable. One person notices weather patterns. Another remembers where edible roots grow during droughts. Older members recall distant routes travelled decades earlier. Children absorb this knowledge gradually while walking beside adults across immense distances. The group becomes something larger than a collection of individuals. It functions almost like a distributed survival system, storing experience collectively rather than inside one vulnerable mind. Modern anthropology offers glimpses of how powerful this system can become. Among recent hunter-gatherer societies studied across Africa, Australia, and the Arctic, survival often depends on broad social networks extending far beyond immediate family. Information travels constantly between bands. News of water, animal migrations, dangerous territory, or hostile groups spreads through human connection. Scholars caution against directly projecting modern hunter-gatherer behavior into deep prehistory because conditions differ greatly. Yet these societies may preserve echoes of older adaptive patterns. The evidence repeatedly points toward one conclusion. Humans survive not merely through intelligence, but through shared intelligence. The lonely genius wandering prehistoric wilderness alone belongs mostly to modern imagination. Ancient reality appears far harsher. Even highly skilled hunters depend on companions for tasks impossible to sustain individually over long periods. Fires must be maintained during storms. Injured members require care. Meat from large kills spoils quickly unless many people process it together. Camps need watchers during darkness. Children must be protected while adults search for food. Solitary travel occasionally happens, certainly, but permanent isolation likely remains rare and dangerous. Archaeological discoveries from ancient campsites reinforce this picture. At locations scattered across Eurasia and Africa, researchers uncover repeated layers of occupation, suggesting coordinated return patterns over generations. Hearths cluster in organized arrangements. Animal bones show systematic butchering by multiple individuals working together. Stone tool debris spreads across communal working spaces where knowledge is shared openly through observation and teaching. One lesser-known detail emerges from microscopic analysis of ancient stone tools. Certain tools contain wear patterns suggesting they pass between different users rather than remaining tied to one individual exclusively. This may seem small, but it hints at something deeply important. Technology itself becomes social. Skills spread through imitation, correction, and repeated cooperation. Human survival increasingly depends on collective learning rather than isolated experience. Language almost certainly accelerates this process dramatically. Nobody knows when fully modern language first emerges. The evidence remains incomplete because speech leaves few direct traces in the archaeological record. Yet by at least several 100,000 years ago, humans and perhaps Neanderthals likely communicate with far greater complexity than earlier ancestors. Detailed cooperation during hunts, migration planning, and environmental teaching becomes much easier once information can move rapidly between minds. A dangerous river crossing no longer needs rediscovery by each generation separately. It can be described, remembered, warned against. Words allow invisible threats to travel ahead of experience. This ability fundamentally changes how humans move through landscapes. Other predators react mostly to immediate conditions. Humans begin navigating partly through stories carried over enormous spans of time. A child may fear a distant valley because elders described starvation there decades earlier. Entire routes become associated with danger, abundance, or death through oral memory. Scholars still debate the precise depth of these traditions in prehistoric societies, but even simple narrative transmission provides enormous advantages, and fear itself becomes organized socially. A lone traveler encountering strange sounds at night experiences terror as an individual. A group experiences fear collectively, distributing emotional burden across many people. Shared rituals likely emerge partly for this reason. Firelight gatherings, repeated movement patterns, communal sleeping arrangements, and coordinated watches during darkness all reduce uncertainty psychologically as well as physically. Humans calm one another simply by remaining nearby. Neuroscience today shows that human stress responses change dramatically in the presence of trusted companions. Heart rates stabilize, vigilance becomes less exhausting, sleep improves. Ancient hunters do not understand hormones or neural chemistry, but they understand the practical reality perfectly. Companionship keeps fear manageable. This may explain why solitary punishment appears so devastating across many later human societies. Exile repeatedly emerges as one of the harshest consequences imaginable. From tribal banishment to remote imprisonment, deep beneath cultural variation lies an older biological truth. For most of human history, separation from protective social networks significantly increases the likelihood of suffering and death. The environment reinforces this lesson constantly. During colder periods of the Ice Age, temperatures across northern regions can collapse suddenly within years or even seasons. Grasslands shrink. Herd migrations change direction unexpectedly. Sudden storms bury familiar landmarks beneath snow. Small bands crossing exposed plains face brutal conditions where mistakes become fatal very quickly. Wind strips heat from human bodies with terrifying efficiency, without coordinated shelter building and shared fires. Survival windows narrow dramatically. Even deserts, often imagined as empty, demand intense cooperation. Ancient travelers crossing arid landscapes must memorize hidden water locations, sometimes separated by days of walking. Missing a single spring may kill entire groups. What survives in the archaeological record suggests that pathways through harsh environments become deeply embedded in social tradition. Routes are remembered collectively because forgetting them carries catastrophic consequences. Yet cooperation also creates tensions. Traveling together means sharing food shortages, exhaustion, illness, and fear. Conflicts inevitably emerge inside groups forced into constant proximity. The archaeological record occasionally preserves signs of this strain. Some campsites show abrupt abandonment. Others contain evidence of injury likely caused by interpersonal violence. Scholars still debate how hierarchical or egalitarian many prehistoric groups truly were, but no single explanation fully accounts for the complexity of ancient social life. Humans depend on cooperation while simultaneously struggling against the pressures it creates. This contradiction may define much of human history from the very beginning. The same social bonds that protect groups can also trap individuals inside systems of obligation and conflict. Hunters traveling together must coordinate decisions constantly: where to move, when to rest, how to divide food, which risks deserve taking. Every disagreement matters because survival depends on collective action. And still they keep moving. By roughly 70,000 years ago, modern humans begin spreading outward across astonishing distances. Coastlines, forests, steppes, and mountain corridors slowly fill with migrating bands carrying tools, memories, and relationships across continents. Some groups vanish completely. Others survive and continue onward. Many likely disappear without leaving any trace recognizable today. But almost nowhere do humans move entirely alone. Across deep time, companionship becomes as essential to survival as fire itself. A human separated from others loses more than protection. They lose accumulated memory, shared labor, emotional stability, and access to generations of knowledge stored collectively inside the group. Ancient alliances are not sentimental luxuries. They are survival technologies refined over hundreds of thousands of years. And somewhere beyond the reach of surviving evidence, beneath skies crowded with unfamiliar stars, small bands continue walking together through darkness toward places no human has ever seen before. The wolves begin following long before the humans notice them. At first they remain distant shapes moving along ridge lines beyond the reach of firelight, pale forms against snow, silent shadows threading through tall grass after dusk. They do not attack immediately because predators understand patience better than panic. They study weakness. They wait for exhaustion, injury, separation, or weather to tilt the balance. In the Ice Age world, danger rarely arrives all at once. It circles slowly around the edges of human movement, searching for the moment when the group becomes vulnerable. Ancient hunters know this feeling intimately. Even when predators remain unseen, their presence lingers in tracks, half-eaten carcasses, warning calls from birds, sudden silences in the forest. Humans become extraordinarily skilled at reading these signs because survival demands constant awareness. The evidence preserved in prehistoric sites suggests that early hunters occupy the same ecological spaces as some of the most formidable carnivores ever to live. Cave lions weighing hundreds of kilograms roam Eurasia. Giant hyenas crush bones with jaws strong enough to splinter mammoth remains. Packs of dire wolves and other canids move across open plains in coordinated groups, eerily similar to human hunting bands themselves. The comparison matters. Humans are not the only social hunters in prehistoric ecosystems. Wolves hunt cooperatively. Lions coordinate ambushes. Hyenas defend territory collectively. Orcas work together with astonishing intelligence in coastal waters. Social behavior repeatedly appears among successful predators because cooperation multiplies strength. For humans, however, sociality becomes even more essential because the human body remains physically unimpressive compared to many rivals. A lone person armed only with stone tools stands little chance against a healthy adult cave bear. Together the calculation changes. Archaeological evidence from ancient kill sites reveals signs of increasingly organized group hunting over hundreds of thousands of years, at locations in Europe, Africa, and the Near East. Researchers uncover animal remains suggesting coordinated drives toward cliffs, wetlands, or ambush zones where prey loses mobility. Large animals such as bison, horses, and mammoths often require multiple hunters working in dangerous proximity. Spears alone rarely guarantee immediate kills. Wounded animals can lash out with enormous force. One mistake may cripple or kill a hunter instantly. The prehistoric world contains countless opportunities for catastrophic injury. Broken bones, torn muscles, deep puncture wounds, infections, exposure after failed hunts. A solitary hunter suffering even minor injuries may simply disappear into the landscape without leaving recognizable traces. Groups reduce these risks by distributing danger across many individuals. Some of the clearest evidence comes from Schöningen in Germany, where archaeologists discover wooden spears around 300,000 years old alongside horse remains. These weapons are carefully balanced and sophisticated, suggesting deliberate hunting strategies rather than random scavenging. Scholars still debate aspects of how these hunts unfolded, but coordinated action almost certainly plays a central role. Humans are already becoming specialists in collective violence against animals much larger than themselves, and predators notice. Large carnivores compete directly with humans for meat across many prehistoric landscapes. This competition likely shapes human behavior in ways modern people rarely experience. Today, most humans live separated from apex predators entirely. Ancient hunters exist inside ecosystems where they can become prey at any moment. Campsites require defensive positioning. Fires must remain active. Fresh kills attract dangerous attention quickly. One surprising detail emerges from cave studies in Europe. Certain caves alternate repeatedly between occupation by humans and large predators over thousands of years. Layers containing hearths and tools may sit directly above layers filled with bear remains or hyena dens. Neither species permanently controls these shelters. Ownership shifts constantly depending on season, strength, and circumstance. The prehistoric landscape is not securely human territory, it is contested ground. This reality may explain why group sleeping arrangements become so important. Sleeping alone in predator territory creates immense vulnerability. Even modern campers in wilderness areas often experience heightened anxiety after darkness falls, despite knowing most large predators avoid humans whenever possible. Ancient humans face environments where caution remains fully justified. Fire changes part of this equation, but not all of it. Controlled fire offers warmth, protection, cooked food, and psychological comfort. Many predators hesitate near flames. Yet maintaining fire through cold nights requires labor and coordination. Someone must gather fuel constantly. Wet conditions can extinguish flames unexpectedly. Strong winds scatter embers. Evidence from ancient hearths suggests repeated communal activity centered around maintaining controlled fire zones. These spaces become more than cooking areas. They serve as islands of relative safety inside dangerous environments. The emotional importance of firelight in human evolution may run deeper than simple practicality. Around shared flames, visibility improves, faces become recognizable, darkness retreats slightly, social bonds strengthen through storytelling, teaching, and collective rest. Predators remain outside the circle of light. The contrast between illuminated camp and surrounding darkness likely shapes human psychology profoundly over immense stretches of time. And still, attacks happen. Direct evidence remains rare because prehistoric events seldom preserve themselves clearly, but some archaeological discoveries hint at violent encounters between humans and predators. Skeletons occasionally show tooth marks consistent with carnivore scavenging or attack. Ancient camps contain defensive positioning near cliffs or elevated ground. In some regions, human activity clusters near areas offering better visibility against approaching threats. One famous site from Spain, the Cima de los Huesos cave system, contains remains of numerous ancient humans deposited deep underground roughly 400,000 years ago. Scholars debate exactly how these bodies arrived there, but the broader context reveals how hazardous prehistoric environments truly are. Falls, predators, disease, territorial conflict, and environmental disasters constantly threaten survival. A group improves odds, but never guarantees safety. Children face particular danger. Young humans develop slowly compared to many animals. They remain dependent for years, unable to travel quickly or defend themselves effectively. This creates enormous challenges during migrations and hunts, yet it also reinforces collective survival strategies. Protecting children requires cooperation, extending beyond biological parents alone. Anthropologists studying hunter-gatherer societies often observe extensive shared childcare systems where many adults contribute to protection and teaching. The prehistoric roots of this behavior may stretch very deep. The vulnerability of children likely influences movement patterns directly. Groups travel at speeds determined partly by their weakest members. Camps are chosen for defensibility as much as convenience. Hunting strategies must account for protecting non-hunters nearby. Humans become social not simply because cooperation improves hunting success, but because raising children in dangerous environments may be nearly impossible without broad support networks. There is another unsettling possibility as well. Some researchers suggest that humans survive partly because predators learn caution around groups. A solitary human appears vulnerable. 20 humans carrying fire, spears, and coordinated aggression represent a dangerous opponent capable of injury even to large carnivores. Over generations, predators and humans may shape one another's behavior through mutual fear. Wolves testing human camps eventually learn which situations carry unacceptable risks. Humans likewise develop instincts for interpreting predator behavior. This long coexistence may even lay foundations for one of the strangest relationships in human history. Somewhere in the distant past, certain wolves stop viewing humans purely as rivals or prey. The exact path toward domestication remains debated, but early cooperation between humans and proto-dogs likely begins within these dangerous Ice Age landscapes. Shared vigilance around camps, mutual warning systems, and coordinated hunting gradually blur boundaries between species. The irony is extraordinary. One of humanity's oldest animal companions may descend from the very predators ancient hunters once feared most intensely. Yet before companionship with dogs fully emerges, humans survive largely through one another. When storms trap travelers far from shelter, companions keep fires alive. When predators circle camps at night, multiple watchers stay awake. When hunters bleed after dangerous encounters with wounded prey, others carry them home. No single explanation fully accounts for humanity's survival across such hostile environments, but collective defense remains impossible to ignore. The ancient world rewards awareness, endurance, and intelligence. But above all, it rewards groups capable of remaining together when fear, exhaustion, and darkness press constantly against the edges of survival. Beyond the firelight, unseen eyes continue watching from the cold. The plain stretches so far that distance itself becomes deceptive. Under a pale Ice Age sky, herds drift across grasslands that seem endless, darkening the horizon like moving weather. Wind bends low vegetation into silver waves. There are no roads, no markers, no walls, no visible boundaries separating safety from danger. A traveller standing alone in such a landscape may feel exposed in ways modern people rarely experience anymore. There is nowhere to hide. Storms can be seen approaching from hours away, yet still arrive with terrifying force. The land offers abundance and threat at the same time. For ancient hunters, open plains create a strange contradiction. These regions support enormous herds of prey animals capable of feeding entire groups for weeks. Mammoths, bison, wild horses, reindeer, saiga antelope, and oryx migrate across vast territories following seasonal grasses and water. Human communities depend on tracking these movements with extraordinary precision, but the plains also strip away protection. Forests conceal danger, grasslands reveal vulnerability. The farther humans move from sheltering terrain, the more they rely on coordinated travel. Archaeologists studying Paleolithic migration patterns often find camps arranged along predictable, ecological corridors near rivers, seasonal crossings, and elevated observation points. What survives in the record suggests that ancient groups avoid wandering blindly into open landscapes whenever possible. Instead, they follow inherited pathways shaped by generations of accumulated experience. These routes are not roads in the modern sense. They are remembered sequences of survival decisions encoded into collective memory. A certain hill offers visibility during storms. A shallow valley provides fuel for fires. A frozen river becomes safe to cross only during specific weeks of winter. One water source remains reliable during drought years while another dries unexpectedly. Such knowledge turns hostile geography into navigable territory. Without it, the plains become deadly very quickly. The danger begins with exposure. Unlike forests or mountains, open grasslands provide little protection against weather extremes. Wind strips body heat relentlessly. Sudden snowstorms erase landmarks within minutes. During warmer periods, heat exhaustion and dehydration threaten travelers moving beneath direct sun for days at a time. Humans possess remarkable endurance, but endurance alone cannot overcome environmental exposure indefinitely. Modern survival studies reveal how quickly isolated individuals deteriorate under such conditions. Disorientation emerges first, decision-making weakens, panic increases energy consumption, and accelerates dehydration. Ancient hunters likely understand these risks intuitively through repeated observation. Travelers separated from the group often do not return. Some archaeological discoveries hint at the scale of this danger. In parts of Eurasia, researchers uncover isolated human remains far from established occupation sites, sometimes with minimal equipment nearby. Scholars debate many interpretations because evidence remains incomplete, but certain finds suggest deaths occurring during travel itself rather than inside settlements. A broken leg, sudden storm, or navigational mistake may leave individuals stranded in landscapes too large and unforgiving for solitary survival. One lesser-known clue comes from prehistoric footprints preserved in ancient sediments. At several sites across Africa and Europe, trackways show repeated patterns of group movement rather than isolated wandering. Adults and children travel together. Individuals remain clustered closely. In some cases, smaller footprints appear positioned between larger ones, possibly reflecting protective group arrangements during movement. These frozen moments preserve something hauntingly human. People stay near one another because distance equals risk. The plains also magnify another ancient fear: getting lost. Modern navigation depends heavily on artificial systems maps, roads, satellites, signage, digital devices. Ancient hunters possess none of these. They navigate instead through landmarks, stars, animal behavior, wind direction, vegetation changes, and memory carried collectively across generations. This system can function with astonishing sophistication, but it remains vulnerable to environmental disruption. Storms are particularly dangerous. Heavy snow or dust can erase tracks entirely. Flooding transforms familiar valleys into impassable barriers. Wildfires alter recognizable terrain overnight. During glacial periods, Advancing ice sheets reshape whole regions across relatively short spans of time. A path remembered by elders may no longer exist decades later. No single explanation fully accounts for how prehistoric groups maintain reliable orientation across such unstable environments. Scholars still debate the balance between instinct, environmental observation, oral tradition, and seasonal repetition. Yet evidence increasingly suggests that navigation itself becomes social. Multiple people contribute pieces of environmental understanding. The group collectively remembers what no isolated traveller could reliably retain alone. There is also psychological protection in shared movement. Across open plains, humans can often see danger long before reaching it. A distant predator, smoke from unknown fires, strange movement near riverbanks. Visibility offers warning but also anxiety. In immense landscapes without shelter, small human figures may feel profoundly insignificant. Companions help stabilize emotional responses to uncertainty. Fear becomes easier to manage when distributed socially. Anthropologists studying recent nomadic cultures sometimes describe long silences during travel, broken by brief exchanges confirming direction, weather, or shared awareness. Such communication may appear minimal, but it constantly reinforces collective orientation. People remain connected mentally as well as physically. Ancient hunters crossing enormous plains likely rely on similar patterns. And then there are the hunts themselves. Large grassland prey rarely allow close approach. Hunters must coordinate movement across considerable distances while remaining aware of wind direction, terrain, herd behavior, and escape routes. Cooperative persistence hunting may play a role in some environments, particularly in hotter climates where humans exploit endurance advantages over animals prone to overheating. In colder regions, ambushes and drives become more common. Either strategy demands teamwork. A mammoth hunt, if it occurs at all, represents staggering risk. Despite dramatic modern portrayals, humans probably hunt mammoths less frequently than popular imagination suggests. These animals are enormous, intelligent, and dangerous. One charging mammoth can destroy an entire hunting party. What survives in the archaeological record suggests that when humans do target such prey, planning and coordination are essential. At sites associated with mammoth processing, researchers sometimes find evidence of repeated communal labour on a massive scale. Bones are systematically butchered, meat is transported, fat, marrow, hides, and ivory are carefully processed. Such operations require many individuals working together quickly before scavengers arrive. The plains may provide food abundance, but they also attract competition from every predator capable of smelling blood across kilometers of open terrain. This creates a constant rhythm of tension. During migration seasons, human groups move alongside giant animal herds through territories crowded with competing carnivores. Wolves shadow weakened prey. Lions or large cats position themselves near watering sites. Hyenas patrol carcasses aggressively. Humans must navigate not only the movement of prey but the movement of every other predator following the same ecological pulse. The open plains become vast moving ecosystems of hunger. One particularly haunting aspect of prehistoric life emerges here. Ancient hunters likely witnessed death constantly. Starving animals collapsing during winter, predators dismembering prey, injured companions succumbing to exposure, infants dying during migration. Modern societies often shield people from direct contact with mortality, but prehistoric existence rarely allows such distance. Group travel helps humans endure psychologically as well as materially. Shared grief becomes survivable in ways solitary suffering may not. Yet despite all the dangers, the plains continue pulling humans outward. These immense grasslands act almost like migration highways connecting distant regions across continents. Through them, humans slowly expand deeper into Europe, Central Asia, and eventually the Americas. Knowledge spreads along these pathways. Stone tool techniques travel between groups. Genetic exchange occurs across surprisingly large distances. The openness that creates vulnerability also creates connection. Some scholars believe these broad ecological corridors help shape human adaptability itself. Groups moving repeatedly through changing landscapes become flexible, opportunistic, and highly social because rigid survival strategies fail under unstable conditions. The plains reward cooperation between people capable of sharing information rapidly and adjusting together. And so, under skies wide enough to dwarf every human ambition, small bands continue walking beside one another through the cold wind. Not because fear disappears in groups, but because the emptiness beyond the circle of companionship remains far more terrifying. Somewhere ahead, beyond the shifting herds and distant storms, another horizon waits. The stranger appears at the edge of the valley just before sunset. For a long moment, nobody moves. The hunting party freezes among scattered rocks above the riverbank while the distant figure stands equally still below them. The light is fading quickly now, turning the grass bronze beneath the evening wind. There is no visible weapon at first, no obvious sign of companions nearby, only a solitary human shape watching from across open ground. In the modern world, another person often represents comfort, help, or simple indifference. In prehistory, the calculation is far more uncertain. A stranger may carry knowledge, trade opportunities, or news of changing animal migrations, but they may also bring disease, violence, theft, or hidden allies waiting beyond sight. Ancient hunters learn early that human beings can become as dangerous as any predator. The archaeological evidence for prehistoric violence remains incomplete and fiercely debated in some cases, yet traces of conflict appear again and again across deep time. Skeletons bear embedded spear points. Skulls show blunt force fractures consistent with combat. Entire burial sites contain signs of sudden massacre. No single explanation fully accounts for how common organized violence truly was among early human societies, but the record leaves little doubt that conflict existed long before civilization. This danger changes how humans travel. A lone individual moving through unfamiliar territory immediately appears vulnerable. They possess limited defense against ambush, robbery, or territorial aggression. Groups project strength. Numbers discourage attack. Multiple adults watching different directions reduce the likelihood of surprise encounters. Ancient hunters may not always trust one another, but they trust isolation even less. Some of the clearest evidence comes from later prehistoric periods, especially after humans begin settling more permanently in resource-rich regions. Yet even much older hunter-gatherer sites reveal signs of interpersonal violence stretching back tens of thousands of years. At Jebel Sahaba near the Nile Valley, for example, archaeologists uncover skeletons around 13,000 years old, bearing numerous projectile injuries. Some individuals appear struck multiple times. Scholars debate whether the site reflects warfare, repeated raids, or long-term regional conflict intensified by environmental stress. Whatever the precise explanation, the dead clearly do not perish peacefully. The deeper humans spread into contested territory, the more companionship becomes political as well as protective. Resources are rarely distributed evenly across prehistoric landscapes. Rivers, migration corridors, fishing grounds, and seasonal gathering sites create concentrations of value that different groups may attempt to control. During harsh climatic periods, shrinking resources likely intensify tensions dramatically. A valley rich in game during drought years may mean survival for one band and starvation for another. Under such conditions, travelling alone becomes extraordinarily risky. There is another complication as well. Ancient humans are not the only humans moving across these landscapes. For thousands of years, multiple human species coexist across Eurasia and parts of Africa. Modern humans encounter Neanderthals. Denisovans exist somewhere across eastern regions. Other populations, still poorly understood, leave faint genetic traces inside living people today. The precise nature of interactions between these groups remains debated. Some evidence suggests interbreeding. Other evidence hints at competition and displacement. What survives in the record suggests a complex reality impossible to reduce to simple categories of peace or war. Encounters may shift unpredictably depending on circumstance. Trade and violence may coexist. Cooperation during one season may become hostility during another. Ancient hunters travelling through unfamiliar regions cannot safely assume anything about strangers they encounter. This uncertainty influences social behaviour profoundly. Anthropologists studying small-scale societies often note how introductions, gestures, posture, and movement patterns carry enormous importance during first contact situations. In environments where formal institutions do not exist, survival may depend entirely on reading intention correctly within seconds. A badly interpreted approach can trigger deadly consequences. Prehistoric humans likely developed subtle systems for signaling group identity long before written language or permanent political structures appear. Decorative objects, body markings, tool styles, ornaments, and ritual behaviours may all function partly as social identifiers. Archaeologists sometimes find remarkably similar symbolic artifacts spread across wide territories, suggesting networks of cultural recognition extending far beyond immediate family groups. These networks matter because alliances increase survival odds. A band entirely isolated from neighbouring groups faces severe vulnerabilities. Injuries, poor hunting seasons, environmental disasters, or genetic isolation can threaten long-term survival quickly. Connections with other groups provide opportunities for exchange food, mates, information, tools, and mutual assistance during crisis periods. The prehistoric world rewards both caution and cooperation in delicate balance. One lesser-known detail emerges from studies of ancient stone materials. At some Paleolithic sites, archaeologists discover obsidian, flint, shells, or pigments transported astonishing distances from their geological origins. Certain materials move hundreds of kilometers through exchange networks long before agriculture exists. These objects reveal more than trade. They suggest relationships between distant groups maintained through repeated contact across generations. Travel itself becomes safer when alliances exist along migration routes. A known camp ahead may provide shelter during storms. Friendly groups may share information about dangerous territory or herd movements. Marriages between bands create bonds, reducing conflict likelihood. In many ways, prehistoric mobility depends on social geography as much as physical geography. Humans navigate networks of trust alongside rivers and mountain passes, but trust remains fragile. Environmental stress can destroy alliances rapidly. Climatic fluctuations during the late Pleistocene repeatedly transform landscapes within relatively short periods. Glaciers advance, grasslands shrink, water systems change direction or vanish entirely. During such instability, competition intensifies. Groups once connected through exchange may suddenly perceive one another as threats. Some archaeological sites preserve eerie evidence of this breakdown. Mass graves from later prehistoric Europe occasionally contain individuals killed violently and deposited together without signs of ceremonial burial. Defensive settlements appear in some regions. Weapons become increasingly specialized. Scholars caution against projecting later organized warfare too far backward into earlier periods. Yet the broader pattern remains difficult to ignore. Human cooperation evolves alongside human conflict from very early in the story, and fear of strangers runs deep. Even modern humans carry strong psychological responses to unfamiliar individuals under uncertain conditions. These reactions likely have ancient evolutionary roots, shaped partly by the realities of prehistoric survival. A stranger approaching camp at dusk may represent opportunity or catastrophe. Caution becomes adaptive. Still, total hostility would also be disastrous. Completely isolated groups risk extinction through accident, disease, or ecological collapse. Humans survive because they balance suspicion with selective cooperation. Ancient hunters must constantly decide when to defend territory and when to build alliances. The evidence remains incomplete, but what survives suggests remarkable flexibility in human social behavior. People adapt strategies according to changing environmental pressures. Children likely learn these lessons early. They grow up hearing stories about dangerous encounters, trusted allies, vanished travelers, and forbidden regions. They observe how adults react to unfamiliar tracks near camp. They learn which valleys belong to rivals and which pathways remain relatively safe. Fear becomes cultural memory passed across generations through experience and narrative. This may explain why hospitality traditions emerge so strongly in many later societies shaped by harsh environments. Across deserts, steppes, and mountain regions, offering shelter to travelers often becomes sacred obligation. Such customs may preserve echoes of much older survival systems where mutual assistance between distant groups can determine whether strangers live or die. Yet beneath these traditions remains the older tension never fully erased. The human figure standing beyond the firelight is always uncertain. Friend, enemy, trader, raider, lost traveller, scout. Ancient hunters survive not by eliminating this uncertainty, but by facing it together. Groups absorb risk collectively. More eyes watch unfamiliar movement. More hands defend camp if necessary. More voices remember which strangers once kept their promises and which brought disaster. As darkness settles across the valley, the solitary figure below finally turns and disappears into the grasslands. The hunters remain motionless a little longer before returning quietly toward their fire. Nobody follows alone. The child cannot keep the pace anymore. Snow drifts around small legs already exhausted from hours of walking through frozen ground. The adults slow instinctively without discussion. One hunter shifts the weight of bundled tools onto another shoulder. Someone lifts the child beneath heavy animal furs darkened by smoke and old weather. The journey continues at a different speed now, shaped not by the strongest member of the group but by the weakest. This simple adjustment may help explain why humans survive at all. Among most large mammals, the young become mobile quickly because predators and migration leave little room for prolonged vulnerability. A newborn horse can stand within hours. Young antelope run shortly after birth. Human children are radically different. They remain dependent for years, requiring food, protection, teaching, warmth, and constant supervision through long stretches of development. In the prehistoric world, where travel itself often determines survival, this creates enormous pressure on social systems. No single adult can reliably manage every demand alone. Anthropologists sometimes describe humans as cooperative breeders, meaning child rearing depends heavily on assistance from individuals beyond biological parents, grandparents, older siblings, unrelated adults, and entire social networks contribute to survival. The roots of this behavior likely extend extremely deep into human evolution. Ancient hunters do not merely travel beside one another for protection from predators. They travel together because children make solitary existence nearly impossible. The archaeological record preserves this reality indirectly through traces of family movement embedded across prehistoric sites. Camps contain individuals of all ages. Tiny footprints appear beside adult tracks in ancient sediments. Burials include infants carefully positioned with ornaments or grave goods, suggesting emotional attachment and communal recognition even in harsh survival conditions. These details matter because they reveal something profound about human migration. Entire communities move together, not just isolated hunting parties. This changes everything about prehistoric travel. A group carrying children cannot move recklessly across dangerous terrain. Camps must be selected with greater care. Water crossings become slower and more complicated. Hunting schedules adapt around caregiving needs. Fires require constant maintenance because infants lose body heat quickly. Noise discipline changes as children cry, play, or wander unpredictably. And yet, despite these enormous burdens, humans spread farther and faster than almost any large mammal relative in history. Part of the answer may lie in social flexibility. Ancient hunter groups distribute responsibilities dynamically according to need. Some adults hunt while others gather fuel or prepare food. Older children assist with carrying supplies. Elders contribute memory and environmental knowledge even after physical strength declines. The group survives because labor becomes shared across generations. One lesser-known clue appears in studies of ancient human anatomy itself. Compared to many earlier hominin species, modern humans are born relatively underdeveloped neurologically. Human infants require prolonged brain growth after birth, making childhood unusually long and vulnerable. Scholars still debate exactly why this evolutionary trade-off occurs, but one consequence is unmistakable. Extended childhood allows immense cultural learning. Children walking beside adults across prehistoric landscapes absorb enormous amounts of information gradually over years. They learn tracks, weather signs, edible plants, migration rhythms, dangerous territory, tool-making techniques, and social rules simply through constant participation in group movement. Knowledge transfers not through formal instruction alone, but through shared survival experience repeated daily across long journeys. Travel itself becomes education. The child carried through snow today may later guide future generations through the same mountain corridor decades afterward. Memories accumulate socially over lifetimes. Ancient hunters preserve survival knowledge by embedding younger members directly inside the moving structure of the group. This system also creates emotional bonds of extraordinary strength. Modern neuroscience increasingly suggests that prolonged dependency in human childhood deeply shapes social cognition and attachment. Humans become intensely responsive to faces, voices, emotional cues, and cooperative behavior, partly because survival depends on maintaining close relationships over long developmental periods. Ancient travel reinforces these tendencies constantly. Children sleep near others for safety. Adults monitor one another continuously during dangerous crossings. Fear and comfort become collective experiences. The emotional consequences likely run deep. A child separated from the group in prehistoric conditions faces terrifying odds: exposure, predators, starvation, or simple disorientation may prove fatal within hours or days depending on environment. ancient communities almost certainly develop intense vigilance around keeping children close during movement. Many modern parental instincts panic when a child disappears from sight. Anxiety near environmental hazards. Strong responses to crying may preserve echoes of these ancient realities. Yet prehistoric childhood is not merely suffering and danger. What survives in the archaeological record suggests moments of play, affection, and creativity existing even amid brutal conditions. Researchers discover miniature tools possibly used for learning. Handprints of children appear beside adults inside caves. Tiny footprints run unpredictably through preserved sediments near campsites, hinting at games or curiosity. Ancient movement across landscapes is not only survival labor, it is also ordinary human life unfolding under extraordinary circumstances. Still, the risks remain constant. Long migrations place immense strain on vulnerable members of the group. Illness spreads more easily when resources are scarce. Infants require regular nourishment even during harsh travel conditions. Pregnant women face enormous physical demands moving through unstable environments without permanent shelter or medical care. Many do not survive. The prehistoric record contains countless silences where mothers, children, and entire family lines vanish without trace. Some scholars believe demographic fragility shapes human cooperation more strongly than hunting itself. Predator defense matters, shared labor matters. But the need to raise children successfully across dangerous landscapes may drive social complexity even more profoundly. Groups protecting young members gain long-term survival advantages impossible for isolated individuals to match. The elderly become important here as well. Unlike many animals, humans often live long past peak reproductive years. This unusual lifespan pattern may carry major evolutionary significance. Older individuals preserve memory during periods of environmental instability. They remember failed migrations, dangerous winters, reliable shelters, and hidden resources. Grandparents helping care for children may increase group survival substantially, though the exact evolutionary mechanisms remain debated. In traveling societies, such memory becomes priceless. An elder who recalls where water survives during drought conditions may save dozens of lives years later. Someone remembering safe seasonal crossings through mountains can prevent catastrophe during migration. The group carries its history physically through living people moving together across landscapes. This creates another reason ancient hunters avoid solitary travel whenever possible. Isolation does not merely remove immediate protection. It severs individuals from accumulated cultural memory built collectively across generations. And then there is grief. Prehistoric life likely contains far more death than most modern societies confront directly. Infants perish from disease or exposure. Injuries become fatal unexpectedly. Harsh winters eliminate vulnerable members. Yet archaeological burials suggest humans respond emotionally to these losses very early in history. Bodies are sometimes positioned carefully, decorated, or accompanied by symbolic objects. Scholars debate interpretations constantly because evidence remains fragmentary, but emotional attachment appears unmistakable. Groups make grief survivable. A parent losing a child during migration may continue moving partly because others help carry emotional and physical burdens forward. Collective mourning strengthens social bonds even while reinforcing awareness of shared vulnerability. The journey never stops entirely because stopping often means death for those still living. Perhaps this is why companionship becomes inseparable from survival in human evolution. Ancient hunters do not travel together merely for efficiency. They move collectively because human life itself unfolds through prolonged dependency, memory, teaching, protection, and emotional connection impossible to sustain alone. Across frozen valleys and windswept plains, entire generations grow up inside these moving worlds. Children fall asleep beside firelight while adults quietly watch the darkness beyond camp. Somewhere ahead lies another river crossing, another hunting ground, another season of uncertainty. The group keeps walking because every fragile human future travels within it. Long after the fire burns low, the old man is still awake. The younger hunters sleep beneath layered hides while sparks drift upward into darkness thick with cold wind. Beyond the camp, the landscape is invisible now except for the faint outline of distant hills against the stars. Somewhere far away, wolves are calling across the plains. But the elder's attention remains fixed on something else entirely. He is remembering. Not stories in the modern sense, not entertainment, survival memory. He remembers which valley floods first when spring thaw arrives too early. He remembers a river crossing where ice once collapsed beneath two hunters decades earlier. He remembers a canyon where game disappears during dry years, and another where hidden springs continue flowing long after surface water vanishes. None of this knowledge exists in writing. Nothing has been drawn onto maps. The land survives inside human minds, carried from one campfire to the next. This may be one of the greatest invisible achievements in human history. Long before agriculture, before architecture, before recorded language or organized states, humans create systems for preserving complex environmental knowledge across generations. Ancient hunters survive not simply because they are strong or intelligent, but because memory becomes collective. A single individual can die suddenly. Shared knowledge endures. Archaeologists often speak about tools, bones, or settlements, because physical evidence survives more easily than thought. Yet prehistoric life depends just as heavily on intangible systems, now mostly lost forever. Navigation routes, seasonal timing, animal behavior, weather patterns, dangerous territories as sacred places. Oral memory binds all these together into living networks carried physically by traveling groups. Without such systems, migration across enormous landscapes would become almost impossible. Modern experiments with traditional navigation methods reveal just how sophisticated non-written orientation can become. Indigenous navigators in different parts of the world memorize coastlines, stars, currents, prevailing winds, snow patterns, vegetation changes, and subtle environmental cues with astonishing precision. Scholars caution against assuming direct continuity with deep prehistory, yet these examples demonstrate something crucial: human memory, trained collectively over generations, can function as an extraordinarily powerful survival tool. Ancient hunters likely possess environmental awareness difficult for modern urban societies to fully imagine. Small changes in bird behavior may signal weather shifts hours in advance. Variations in snow texture reveal hidden dangers beneath frozen surfaces. Wind direction carries information about prey movement, nearby predators, or approaching storms. Such observations are not isolated skills possessed by rare specialists. They become woven into everyday survival culture. And this culture travels through companionship. A child walking beside experienced hunters absorbs countless details unconsciously over years of migration. Which plants indicate nearby water? Which cloud formations predict sudden temperature drops? Which valleys amplify dangerous winds during winter? Knowledge spreads continuously through shared presence rather than formal instruction alone. The firelight gatherings matter enormously here. Anthropologists studying oral societies often note how storytelling functions not merely as entertainment, but as information storage. Narratives preserve geography, survival strategies, social rules, and historical memory informs easier to remember across generations. Ancient hunters sitting around fires after long travel days may be doing far more than passing time. They are maintaining the survival archive of the group itself. Some scholars believe certain myths or recurring narrative structures preserve faint echoes of extremely ancient environmental events. Flood traditions, volcanic imagery, vanished coastlines, and stories tied to changing landscapes appear across many cultures worldwide. The evidence remains debated and incomplete, but oral memory may prove surprisingly durable under the right conditions. One striking example comes from parts of Australia, where some indigenous oral traditions appear to describe coastal flooding events potentially linked to rising sea levels thousands of years ago after the last ice age. Researchers continue debating the exact interpretations, yet the possibility itself is remarkable. Human groups may preserve environmental memory across spans of time modern societies often struggle to comprehend. For travelling hunters, forgetting can be catastrophic. A single lost route during migration season may strand entire groups far from water or shelter. Misjudging animal movement patterns can trigger starvation. Entering hostile territory unknowingly may end in violence. The stakes attached to memory are immense, which likely explains why knowledge transmission becomes deeply social and ritualized. The group remembers together because survival depends on redundancy. If one elder dies unexpectedly, others still carry parts of the same knowledge network. Multiple hunters recognize important landmarks. Several individuals understand seasonal timing. Human communities distribute information across many minds, protecting themselves against sudden loss. This system also changes how humans perceive landscapes emotionally. Modern people often experience nature as scenery, recreation, or abstract environment. Ancient hunters likely perceive land as densely layered with memory and meaning. Every valley contains accumulated experience. Every river crossing recalls past danger or success. Certain locations may become associated with death, abundance, alliance, betrayal, or spiritual significance over generations. Movement through such landscapes is never psychologically empty. A group approaching familiar territory may already carry emotional expectations shaped by stories older than any living member. Fear, caution, relief, and reverence become attached to geography itself. Scholars still debate how symbolic or spiritual many prehistoric practices truly were, but evidence increasingly suggests that humans developed strong emotional relationships with place very early in history. Caves provide one haunting example. Across Europe and elsewhere, ancient humans repeatedly enter deep cave systems requiring dangerous navigation through darkness, narrow passages, and unstable terrain. Some caves contain paintings, handprints, or symbolic markings created far from natural light. The purpose of these journeys remains uncertain. Ritual, teaching, social identity, or spiritual behavior may all play roles. What matters here is the effort itself. Humans willingly move together into frightening underground spaces carrying shared meaning, impossible to reduce purely to survival economics. Companionship makes these journeys possible too. Deep caves are terrifying environments even for modern explorers equipped with artificial light. Ancient humans entering them with flickering torches rely heavily on trust, coordination, and collective courage. The same social bonds protecting travelers across plains or forests extend into symbolic spaces as well. And there are practical mysteries still unresolved. How exactly do prehistoric groups maintain accurate migration timing across changing climates? How much information travels between distant bands? How are routes updated after environmental disasters reshape familiar terrain? The evidence remains fragmentary because oral systems vanish so easily once broken. Entire libraries of environmental memory may disappear forever when groups collapse, migrate, or die out. This fragility shadows all human movement through prehistory. Somewhere across Eurasia, countless pathways once existed that nobody alive can reconstruct fully anymore. Hunters followed rivers that later dried into desert channels. Coastal groups travelled shorelines now submerged beneath rising seas. Forest trails vanished beneath glaciers or farmland thousands of years ago. Archaeology recovers fragments, but most ancient mental maps are gone forever. Still, traces remain. Footpaths gradually worn into repeated migration corridors, stone sources connected across enormous distances, camps revisited season after season, shared tool styles spreading between groups. These patterns hint at invisible systems of knowledge once carried entirely inside human relationships. And perhaps that is the deepest reason ancient hunters avoid solitude whenever possible. A lone traveller loses more than physical protection. They lose access to the living memory required to navigate a dangerous and constantly changing world. The elder beside the fading fire finally closes his eyes. Around him, the camp sleeps quietly beneath the stars while cold wind moves across dark grasslands beyond sight. Tomorrow, the journey will continue toward another valley remembered by people who walked there long before anyone now alive was born. The path survives because the group remembers it together. The mammoth does not fall quickly. Even wounded, the animal keeps moving through drifting snow with terrifying force, its breath steaming into frozen air while hunters circle at a cautious distance beyond reach of the tusks. Spears have already struck deep into thick muscle, but the creature remains alive, angry, and immensely dangerous. One wrong movement here can crush bones instantly. The hunters know this because they have seen it happen before. No human being faces such an animal alone. The prehistoric world often rewards patience more than direct confrontation. Despite dramatic modern images of heroic hunters charging enormous beasts head-on, most ancient hunting likely depends on caution, coordination, and carefully managed risk. Large prey animals possess strength capable of killing humans effortlessly. A mammoth, bison, aurochs, or giant elk can destroy isolated hunters with a single impact. Cooperation transforms impossible hunts into survivable strategies. This changes human society profoundly. At some point deep in prehistory, hunting ceases to be merely individual pursuit and becomes collective engineering. Groups learn how to channel animal movement across landscapes, predict herd behavior, exploit terrain, and synchronize attacks. The evidence emerges slowly through scattered archaeological sites spread across continents, but the pattern becomes unmistakable. Humans survive partly because they learn to function together with extraordinary precision under extreme pressure. The mammoth sites are among the most haunting examples. Across parts of Europe, Siberia, and North America, archaeologists uncover locations containing massive accumulations of mammoth bones associated with human tools and camps. Some sites suggest repeated processing of carcasses over generations. Others may represent coordinated hunting or scavenging events involving many individuals working together. Scholars still debate exactly how often humans actively hunt mammoths versus opportunistically exploiting weakened animals trapped by environment or injury. No single explanation fully accounts for all the evidence, yet whether through direct attack, persistence, ambush, or strategic scavenging, one reality remains clear. Processing such enormous animals requires organized communal labor on a remarkable scale. A single mammoth contains immense quantities of meat, fat, hide, sinew, bone, and ivory. These resources can sustain groups for long periods, especially during harsh winters. But abundance creates urgency. Fresh carcasses attract predators rapidly. Meat spoils. Weather changes. Human groups must work quickly and cooperatively to transport, preserve, and defend valuable resources. Every major hunt becomes a temporary center of intense social coordination. Some individuals track wounded prey, others maintain lookout positions against scavengers. Skilled butchers separate usable materials efficiently. Fires are prepared for processing fat or cooking meat. Children and vulnerable members remain protected at safer distances. The hunt does not end with the kill. In many ways, the hardest labor begins afterward. One lesser-known detail from archaeological analysis reveals how sophisticated this cooperation may become. At certain prehistoric kill sites, animal remains show patterned butchering sequences repeated consistently over long periods. This suggests shared technical knowledge passed through generations rather than random improvisation. Ancient hunters developed traditions of collective work refined through experience. And these traditions require trust. Large hunts are dangerous not only because of the prey itself, but because success depends on coordinated timing between multiple individuals. A hunter breaking formation too early may ruin the entire attempt or expose companions to injury. People must rely on one another under conditions where mistakes carry immediate physical consequences. This may help explain why social bonds become so emotionally powerful in human evolution. Trust is not abstract morality for ancient hunters. It is survival infrastructure. Anthropologists studying recent communal hunting cultures often observe strong social pressures surrounding food sharing, bravery, reliability, and cooperation. Individuals who repeatedly endanger others or refuse mutual obligations risk exclusion from group support systems. Scholars remain cautious about directly projecting recent cultural patterns deep into prehistory, yet similar pressures likely emerge very early wherever coordinated hunting becomes essential. Because cooperation creates another problem immediately: fairness. Who receives meat after a successful hunt? Who takes risks during dangerous encounters? Who controls valuable resources like hides or ivory? These questions may sound political in a modern sense, but they arise naturally whenever humans depend heavily on collective labor. Ancient groups likely develop intricate social expectations around sharing long before formal laws exist. What survives in the record suggests surprisingly widespread distribution of resources within many hunter-gatherer systems. Large prey animals produce more food than immediate hunting parties alone can consume quickly. Sharing reduces waste while strengthening alliances inside groups. A hunter injured during one season may survive later because others once shared with them earlier. Cooperation becomes long-term insurance against uncertainty. The environment reinforces this constantly. Hunting success in prehistoric landscapes is rarely predictable. Some days produce abundance, others bring exhaustion and failure. Storms scatter herds unexpectedly. Animals alter migration routes. Injuries reduce mobility. By pooling labor and resources collectively, groups buffer themselves against these fluctuations more effectively than isolated individuals ever could. There is also evidence that hunts themselves become social rituals extending beyond simple food acquisition. Cave paintings from places like Lascaux and Chauvet in France depict animals with extraordinary attention and emotional intensity. Scholars continue debating their exact meaning, ritual, storytelling, teaching, symbolic identity, spiritual behavior, or combinations of all these possibilities. Yet the paintings reveal something important about prehistoric hunters. Animals occupy central psychological space within collective human life. The hunt shapes memory, identity, and social cohesion. Children growing up in travelling bands likely hear repeated accounts of successful hunts, dangerous mistakes, lost companions, and legendary animals encountered across generations. These stories preserve practical knowledge while reinforcing group identity. Shared danger creates shared meaning. And danger is everywhere during the hunt. Bison drives toward cliffs sometimes fail catastrophically. Wounded animals turn unexpectedly. Ice breaks beneath pursuing hunters near frozen rivers. Spears miss. Weather shifts mid-pursuit. Even successful hunts may leave injuries that become life-threatening later through infection or exposure. Archaeological skeletons occasionally preserve evidence of repeated trauma consistent with dangerous physical labor over long periods. Yet humans continue pursuing enormous prey across brutal landscapes because the rewards are transformative. Large animals provide calories dense enough to sustain expanding populations in harsh climates, where plant resources become seasonal or limited. Animal hides create clothing necessary for surviving colder regions. Bone and ivory become tools, structures, ornaments, and weapons. Cooperative hunting helps humans spread into environments many other primates could never endure. Some researchers even suggest that the social demands of a large-game hunting contribute significantly to cognitive evolution itself. Coordinated planning, communication, memory, role specialization, and emotional regulation all become crucial during complex hunts. Scholars still debate the balance between hunting, gathering, sociality, and environmental pressures in shaping human intelligence. But collective problem-solving clearly plays a major role. And perhaps nowhere is that intelligence more visible than in restraint. Ancient hunters do not survive by overpowering nature directly. They survive by understanding timing, movement, weather, animal behavior, and one another. The hunt rewards groups capable of patience and coordination, rather than reckless individual heroism. The wounded mammoth finally slows near a frozen marsh where deep snow limits movement. The hunters close distance carefully now, advancing together beneath the pale sky while steam rises from the animal's dark body into bitter air. Nobody rushes forward alone, everyone watches everyone else. Because in this world, survival belongs not to the strongest individual, but to the group capable of moving as one. The storm arrives without warning. One moment the horizon remains clear beneath thin winter sunlight. The next, wind begins rising across the open ground with sudden violence, carrying snow so dense that distance collapses almost instantly into white confusion. Landmarks vanish. Tracks disappear beneath drifting ice. Voices become difficult to hear even a few meters away. Within minutes, the world itself seems erased. For ancient hunters, weather is never background scenery. It is a living force capable of destroying entire groups with terrifying speed. Modern people often underestimate how unstable prehistoric climates truly are. During the Ice Age and the long transition surrounding it, environments across the planet shift repeatedly through cycles of warming, cooling, flooding, drought, and ecological collapse. Glaciers advance across continents, then retreat. Grasslands become forest, then tundra, then grassland again. Rivers change direction. Coastlines disappear beneath rising seas. Deserts expand into former lakes. Human beings move through landscapes that rarely remain stable for long. This instability makes solitary travel extraordinarily dangerous. A lone hunter caught inside a sudden storm may lose orientation within minutes. Exposure strips heat rapidly from wet or wind-battered bodies. Water sources vanish beneath snow or flood beyond crossing. Familiar pathways become unrecognizable. Ancient groups understand these dangers because they witness them repeatedly across generations. Survival depends not only on strength or hunting skill, but on the ability to adapt collectively when landscapes suddenly change. Some of the clearest evidence for these environmental disruptions comes from geological records rather than archaeology itself. Ice cores, sediment layers, pollen analysis, and ancient lake beds reveal periods of abrupt climatic fluctuation that reshape ecosystems across huge regions. One particularly dramatic example occurs during the Younger Dryas, beginning around 12,900 years ago. When temperatures in parts of the northern hemisphere drop sharply after an earlier warming trend. The exact causes remain debated, though changes in ocean circulation likely play major roles. For human groups already living close to survival margins, such shifts can become catastrophic. Animal migrations alter unpredictably. Plant resources fail. Rivers freeze differently than expected. Entire travel routes become unreliable. Ancient hunters cannot control these changes, but groups traveling together improve their ability to respond. Collective memory helps identify alternate pathways. Shared labor increases chances of maintaining shelter and fire during extreme conditions. Multiple individuals searching for resources cover more territory efficiently. Isolation during environmental crisis often means death. The archaeological record occasionally preserves haunting signs of this vulnerability. Campsites abandoned suddenly. Human remains found in unusual locations far from stable occupation areas. Entire regions showing temporary population decline after severe climatic events. Scholars still debate many interpretations because evidence remains fragmentary. But environmental instability clearly shapes human movement patterns across prehistory. One lesser-known detail emerges from submerged archaeology along ancient coastlines. During the last ice age, sea levels fall dramatically, exposing enormous stretches of land now buried beneath modern oceans. Human groups likely travel these vanished coasts extensively because shorelines provide rich food resources and relatively efficient migration corridors. Then, as glaciers melt, the seas begin rising, slowly at first, then relentlessly. Over generations, entire landscapes disappear beneath advancing water. Camps, pathways, hunting grounds, and sacred places vanish forever. What survives in the record suggests that prehistoric humans repeatedly adapt to these losses by moving inland or reshaping migration routes. Yet the emotional impact must have been immense. Places remembered by elders simply cease to exist. No written records describe these transformations. Only fragments remain buried underwater or preserved indirectly through oral memory and shifting settlement patterns. Flooding is not the only danger. Wildfires sweep through forests after drought periods. Volcanic eruptions darken skies and poison ecosystems. Earthquakes alter rivers or trigger landslides across mountain routes. Even ordinary seasonal storms become deadly when groups depend entirely on portable shelter and exposed campsites. Ancient hunters live inside direct negotiation with environmental forces far larger than themselves, and still they continue traveling. Part of humanity's success may lie precisely in this willingness to move rather than collapse under changing conditions. Other species tied too rigidly to specific habitats often disappear when environments transform rapidly. Humans survive partly because social cooperation allows flexible adaptation across unstable landscapes. But flexibility comes at enormous psychological cost. Imagine crossing familiar territory only to discover that a trusted river crossing has become impassable after flooding, or arriving at traditional hunting grounds to find herds gone entirely due to shifting climate. Such disruptions threaten more than immediate survival. They destabilize inherited memory itself. Knowledge passed across generations may suddenly become unreliable. This uncertainty likely intensifies the importance of companionship. Groups facing environmental chaos can pool observation and experiment collectively. Multiple people test alternate routes, compare environmental signs, and debate decisions. Emotional burdens become shared rather than carried alone. Fear spreads socially, but so does resilience. Anthropologists studying disaster response repeatedly observe how cooperation increases survival during crises. Humans instinctively form temporary support networks during floods, storms, fires, and famine. These tendencies likely have ancient roots shaped by countless environmental emergencies throughout prehistory. Some archaeological sites hint at remarkable human persistence under extreme conditions. In regions repeatedly affected by volcanic activity or harsh climatic oscillation, groups often return again and again despite evident danger. This suggests not blind stubbornness, but deep attachment to known landscapes and migration systems difficult to replace entirely. Yet environmental pressure can also fracture groups. Food shortages intensify conflict, exhaustion weakens cooperation, harsh winters force impossible decisions about movement, resource allocation, or abandoning vulnerable members. Scholars still debate how frequently such breakdowns occur in prehistoric societies, but no single explanation fully captures the emotional complexity of survival under constant ecological stress. There are moments when the environment simply overwhelms human systems entirely. The eruption of the Toba supervolcano around 74,000 years ago may create severe climatic effects across large regions, though researchers continue debating the scale of its impact on human populations. Massive drought cycles affect Africa repeatedly during key phases of human migration. Glacial advances isolate populations for generations. Entire ecological zones shift faster than inherited knowledge can adapt. And yet humans endure, not because ancient hunters conquer nature in any modern sense, but because collective movement allows continuous adjustment. Groups reorganize routes, alliances shift, camps relocate, knowledge evolves. Human survival becomes a process of perpetual adaptation carried through social bonds stronger than any single individual. The storm on the plain grows worse now. Snow drives sideways through darkness while hunters struggle to keep formation against freezing wind. One person alone in this white emptiness would likely vanish before morning, but together the group still possesses a chance. Fires can be rebuilt if even one ember survives. Children can be carried. The injured can lean against stronger companions. Someone may still remember shelter hidden somewhere beyond the storm. Ancient landscapes constantly erase certainty. Trails disappear, rivers move, forests burn, seas rise, entire worlds vanish beneath ice or water. So humans learn to become one another's map through the chaos. The skeleton lies alone beneath a shallow layer of stone and wind-blown earth. No camp surrounds it now. No tools remain except a few scattered fragments half buried nearby. The landscape is silent except for distant wind moving through dry grass. When archaeologists uncover the bones thousands of years later, they face a familiar prehistoric mystery. Who was this person? Why did they die here? Far from any obvious settlement, and perhaps most haunting of all, why were they alone? Across the ancient world, traces of solitary death appear again and again in the archaeological record. Most vanish unnoticed forever. Bones decay, predators scatter remains, floods carry evidence away. Yet occasionally, conditions preserve enough detail to reveal moments of human isolation frozen in time. A lone traveller trapped high in mountain ice. A body discovered beside ancient pathways. Skeletons found deep inside caves or remote deserts far from stable habitation. These discoveries disturb modern imagination partly because they violate the broader pattern repeated throughout prehistory. Humans usually move together. When they die alone, something has often gone wrong. One of the most famous examples emerges from the Alps in 1991 when hikers discover the preserved remains of a man later known as Ötzi. He died more than 5,000 years ago high in freezing mountain terrain. Because ice protects his body so remarkably, researchers recover extraordinary detail about his final days. He carries tools, clothing, weapons, and traces of recent movement across difficult landscapes. An arrow wound in his shoulder suggests violence shortly before death. Though scholars continue debating the exact circumstances, what matters here is not simply how he dies, but where. Ötzi perishes isolated in hostile terrain where survival alone would already be precarious even without injury. His final journey reveals how dangerous prehistoric travel remains despite increasing technological sophistication. A wounded traveller separated from broader support networks faces terrifying vulnerability. And he is far from unique. In caves across Europe and Asia, archaeologists occasionally uncover isolated human remains in positions difficult to explain through normal burial behaviour. Some individuals may become trapped accidentally. Others perhaps seek shelter during storms and never emerge. Certain skeletons bear injuries suggesting falls, animal attacks, or violent encounters during travel itself. The evidence remains frustratingly incomplete because ancient death rarely preserves clear narratives. Bones record fragments of trauma but not fear, exhaustion, or final decisions. Yet patterns emerge slowly across many discoveries. Isolation repeatedly appears alongside catastrophe. One lesser-known example comes from ancient footprints discovered at White Sands in present-day New Mexico. Preserved trackways show humans moving across wet ground thousands of years ago alongside giant Ice Age animals. Some tracks belong to adults carrying children. Others reveal lone movement over significant distances. Researchers studying these pathways notice something remarkable. Certain solitary trackways move with unusual speed and directness, suggesting urgency or stress. Though interpretation remains uncertain, the footprints preserve fleeting emotional traces, moments when someone may have travelled alone through dangerous terrain under pressure, impossible to fully reconstruct. Footprints are haunting precisely because they capture movement rather than aftermath. They reveal hesitation, burden, pace, direction. In rare cases, they show where individuals separate from groups or later rejoin them. Most prehistoric journeys leave no such evidence behind. Entire lives vanish without trace across landscapes too vast and unstable to preserve ordinary existence. And perhaps that is why isolated remains feel so powerful when discovered. They expose the fragility hidden beneath human expansion across the planet. Modern people often imagine prehistoric migrations as steady progress outward into new territory. The reality is almost certainly far harsher. For every successful crossing preserved through descendants and archaeology, countless failures likely disappear entirely from the record. Some travellers become lost during storms, others succumb to illness far from camp. Hunting accidents leave individuals stranded, river crossings fail, conflicts erupt unexpectedly, environmental changes erase familiar pathways, ancient landscapes consume human beings constantly. Groups increase survival odds, but they cannot eliminate uncertainty. There are signs that prehistoric people understand this deeply. Some isolated burials appear surprisingly careful despite remote locations, suggesting companions attempt to honor the dead even during dangerous journeys. Bodies are positioned deliberately. Grave goods accompany certain individuals. Stones may mark resting places. These actions require time and energy from survivors already facing immense environmental pressure. Companionship extends beyond life itself. At Shanidar Cave in Iraq, several Neanderthal individuals appear buried intentionally, though interpretations remain debated among scholars. If correct, these burials suggest emotional and social obligations surrounding death, reaching far back into human history. Ancient groups do not simply abandon one another casually. Bonds persist through grief and memory even under harsh survival conditions. Still, some deaths occur beyond the reach of help entirely. Deserts preserve particularly unsettling examples. In arid regions, travelers separated from known water sources may die surprisingly close to survival. Archaeologists occasionally find isolated remains near ancient migration corridors or dry riverbeds, hinting at navigation failure, exhaustion, or environmental miscalculation. A single wrong decision in such landscapes can become irreversible very quickly. Mountains create similar dangers. High-altitude passes offer critical routes through otherwise impassable terrain. Yet weather changes violently there. Avalanches, falls, freezing temperatures, and oxygen deprivation threaten travelers constantly. Ancient hunters crossing these regions almost certainly rely heavily on collective movement and inherited route knowledge. A lone person caught by sudden conditions may vanish into snowfields or crevasses forever. Even coastlines, often rich in resources, contain hidden risks. Tides isolate travelers unexpectedly. Storm surges destroy camps overnight. Fog disorients navigation. Rising seas erase familiar landmarks across generations. Some prehistoric individuals likely drown during crossings, or disappear into environments leaving almost no recoverable evidence behind. What survives archaeologically may represent only a tiny fraction of prehistoric loss. This realization changes how ancient human expansion appears. The spread across continents is not smooth triumph, but repeated survival against overwhelming odds. Each successful migration route likely carries invisible shadows of failed attempts, vanished groups, and solitary deaths never remembered. Yet there is another side to these discoveries too. Isolated remains sometimes reveal astonishing resilience. Individuals survive severe injuries while traveling. People carry sophisticated equipment across difficult terrain. Some journey enormous distances despite harsh conditions. Even when separated from groups temporarily, ancient humans display adaptability and determination remarkable by any standard. The problem is not that humans are weak alone. The problem is that prehistoric environments are mercilessly unforgiving towards sustained isolation. Modern psychological studies suggest prolonged solitude under stressful conditions impairs cognition, emotional regulation, and decision-making. Ancient travelers likely experienced similar effects intensified by immediate physical danger. Fear sharpens awareness initially, but gradually exhausts the body and mind when unsupported socially. Companions interrupt this downward spiral. Another voice confirms direction. Another fire shares warmth. Another person notices injury before collapse becomes irreversible. Human beings stabilize one another biologically and emotionally in ways often invisible until absent. Perhaps this explains why lonely deaths in archaeology feel so emotionally immediate even now. They touch something ancient inside modern consciousness. A solitary skeleton beneath wind-blown earth represents more than individual mortality. It represents separation from the collective systems that carried humanity through most of its existence. As darkness falls across the excavation site, the uncovered bones lie exposed briefly beneath modern floodlights before preservation teams begin their careful work. Tens of thousands of years earlier, this person likely walked beneath the same stars, believing the journey would continue. Somewhere, perhaps as others once searched for them, nobody speaks while the meat is divided. The hunters sit close to the fire beneath drifting smoke while sharp stone blades separate flesh from bone in careful silence. Children wait nearby. Elders watch without interruption. Every movement here follows patterns older than memory itself. Certain portions pass first toward the injured hunter, unable to join the expedition. Others go to nursing mothers, older members, or families with small children. The strongest hunters receive respect, but not unlimited control. In a world balanced constantly between abundance and starvation, survival depends on rules rarely written yet deeply understood. Ancient companionship is not simple friendship, it is obligation. Prehistoric groups survive because individuals accept invisible systems of cooperation regulating movement, food, protection, and trust. Without such systems, traveling together would collapse into chaos under pressure. Hunting bands crossing dangerous landscapes cannot afford endless conflict over resources or responsibility. The group itself becomes fragile infrastructure requiring constant maintenance through shared expectations. Most of these rules leave no direct trace in the archaeological record. Stone tools survive, human bones survive, fires leave ash, but agreements, loyalties, resentments, and acts of generosity vanish almost completely unless reflected indirectly through behavior. Scholars reconstruct prehistoric social life cautiously because the evidence remains incomplete. Yet certain patterns appear repeatedly across hunter-gatherer societies past and present. Cooperation works only when supported by social norms strong enough to restrain destructive individual behavior. Food sharing stands at the center of this system. Large-game hunting produces unpredictable outcomes. Some expeditions succeed dramatically, others fail entirely. If hunters keep all resources privately after successful kills, vulnerable members of the group may starve during difficult periods, weakening the community as a whole. What survives from ethnographic studies of many mobile societies suggests widespread sharing practices designed partly to distribute environmental risk collectively. Ancient hunters likely understand this instinctively. Today's successful provider may become tomorrow's injured burden. This creates subtle but powerful forms of interdependence. Generosity is not pure altruism in the modern romantic sense. It functions partly as survival insurance inside unstable ecosystems. Individuals who contribute reliably during prosperous periods strengthen bonds that may sustain them later during hardship. Yet sharing alone does not guarantee harmony. Traveling groups endure immense psychological strain. Hunger sharpens tempers. Exhaustion reduces patience. Dangerous environments force constant decision-making under uncertainty. Who leads during migration? When should the group abandon failing territory? How much risk is acceptable during hunts? These tensions can fracture communities quickly if unmanaged. Anthropologists studying mobile hunter societies often describe elaborate informal mechanisms for reducing dominance and conflict. Boasting may be mocked. Aggressive behavior discouraged socially. Skilled hunters expected to remain modest despite importance to group survival. Scholars debate how universal such patterns truly are, but the broader principle matters. ancient humans likely developed cultural systems specifically designed to preserve cooperation under stressful conditions. Because the cost of breakdown is catastrophic, a group divided during migration may lose access to essential labor, protection, memory, or caregiving. Isolated factions become more vulnerable to predators, starvation, or rival groups. Companionship survives partly because humans learn to suppress certain conflicts before they destroy collective resilience entirely. Children absorb these expectations constantly. They watch how food is distributed. They observe who receives care during illness. They learn which behaviors strengthen trust and which provoke exclusion. Social rules become embodied through daily movement alongside others rather than formal instruction alone. Ancient morality grows from practical survival realities long before written law or organized religion appear. One lesser-known clue to these relationships emerges from studies of prehistoric injury patterns. At several archaeological sites, individuals survive severe trauma that would likely prove fatal without prolonged support. Broken limbs heal. Debilitating conditions persist for years. This suggests groups tolerate temporary decreases in individual productivity rather than abandoning vulnerable members immediately. Compassion becomes structurally useful. A hunter crippled during one season may still carry environmental knowledge vital later. Elders unable to travel quickly may preserve migration memory impossible to replace. Parents caring for infants contribute to long-term group survival, even when unable to hunt effectively. Human societies gradually evolve around extended dependency and mutual support, unlike most predator systems in nature. Still, not everyone belongs equally. Social exclusion may remain one of the oldest human punishments, precisely because it threatens survival so directly. Archaeologists rarely recover explicit evidence of exile or abandonment, but anthropological parallels suggest communities across many periods enforce cooperation partly through fear of isolation. A person repeatedly violating group expectations risks losing protection, food access, or movement rights. And outside the group waits the ancient world itself. Cold, predators, rival humans, hunger. This pressure gives social bonds enormous emotional force. Acceptance means safety. Rejection means vulnerability. Modern psychological research increasingly suggests human brains are extraordinarily sensitive to social belonging, because exclusion historically carried life-threatening consequences over evolutionary timescales. Even silence inside prehistoric camps may hold meaning shaped by these pressures. Anthropologists observing highly mobile societies sometimes note remarkable restraint around direct confrontation during tense situations. Open conflict risks destabilizing fragile cooperation. Instead, disagreement may emerge through avoidance, storytelling, humor, or subtle social pressure rather than immediate violence. Such strategies help preserve group cohesion during extended travel where separation is not easily survivable. Of course, violence still happens. Some archaeological sites preserve signs of interpersonal injury, likely caused by disputes within communities themselves. Human beings never become perfectly cooperative. Jealousy, resentment, fear, and ambition remain ancient forces. Yet what distinguishes humans from many predators may be the extraordinary amount of emotional negotiation required to keep large cooperative groups functioning despite these tensions. And movement intensifies everything. Permanent settlements allow distance after arguments. Traveling bands rarely possess such luxury. People sleep beside one another, share fires constantly, and depend on collective coordination every day. Small irritations can grow dangerous quickly under exhaustion or scarcity. Ancient companionship therefore requires continuous emotional management largely invisible in surviving evidence. Perhaps this explains the importance of ritual. Shared songs, repeated storytelling, body decoration, burial customs, dances, or ceremonial gatherings may strengthen emotional cohesion within groups enduring constant environmental stress. Scholars continue debating the origins and meanings of prehistoric symbolic behavior, but many rituals likely serve practical social purposes alongside spiritual or emotional significance. Humans survive partly by creating shared realities stronger than the individual fear. One remarkable example appears in long-distance exchange networks emerging across prehistoric Eurasia and Africa. Decorative shells, pigments, beads, and rare stone materials travel enormous distances between groups. Such objects may signal alliances, identity, memory, or mutual obligations extending beyond immediate kinship ties. Ancient companionship gradually expands outward into broader social landscapes, connecting strangers through repeated exchange and recognition. The travelling group becomes part of something larger. But inside the camp tonight, survival remains immediate and fragile. The fire crackles softly while meat continues passing between waiting hands according to rules nobody wrote down and nobody dares ignore. Outside the circle of light, darkness spreads across frozen ground where predators still move unseen. Every person near the fire understands, consciously or not, that their individual fate remains tied to everyone else sitting there. Not because ancient humans are naturally peaceful, not because conflict disappears, but because the journey through hostile landscapes demands forms of cooperation powerful enough to overcome isolation. At least most of the time, the silent rules holding the group together may be invisible now. Yet without them, humanity's long migration across the earth might never have survived at all. The sea ice stretches to the horizon like frozen stone. Under pale northern light, small groups move carefully across a landscape that should not exist. Winds carve sharp ridges through snowfields. Beneath the ice, dark water shifts slowly with distant currents. Far behind these, travellers lie territories already familiar through generations of movement. Ahead waits an empty continent no human has ever seen. They do not know this, of course. No map marks the boundary between Asia and North America during the height of the last ice age. Sea levels have fallen so dramatically that an enormous land bridge now connects the continents across what will someday become the Bering Strait. Vast grasslands, wetlands, and cold open plains spread across this exposed region for thousands of years. Mammoths roam there. Bison migrate through it. Human beings follow. And almost nobody makes this journey alone. The migration into the Americas remains one of humanity's greatest survival stories, though many details are still fiercely debated among archaeologists. Scholars disagree about timing, routes, and the number of migration waves involved. Some evidence suggests coastal travel by boat or shoreline movement. Other evidence supports inland passage through ice-free corridors opening between massive glaciers. The record remains incomplete, partly because many ancient coastal sites now lie underwater after post-ice age sea level rise. Yet regardless of the exact routes, the scale of the challenge is extraordinary. Groups crossing these northern regions face temperatures capable of killing exposed humans within hours. Fuel for fires becomes scarce in some areas. Weather shifts violently across open tundra. Seasonal darkness lasts for terrifying stretches during winter months. Food sources fluctuate unpredictably. Entire migration pathways may become blocked by advancing ice or flooding meltwater. Under such conditions, companionship is not optional. It is the mechanism allowing movement itself. Archaeological evidence from Upper Paleolithic Siberia reveals human communities already highly adapted to cold environments long before expansion into the Americas fully unfolds. Sophisticated clothing, shelter construction, controlled fire use, and coordinated hunting strategies help groups survive conditions that would overwhelm isolated individuals quickly. Humans transform themselves into cooperative cold weather specialists. Children are carried through this world wrapped in fur against brutal wind. Elders preserve migration memory despite frozen landscapes changing constantly around them. Hunters track herds across distances almost impossible to comprehend without modern transport. Every step depends on collective effort accumulated across generations. The frozen north also magnifies isolation psychologically. Modern polar expeditions repeatedly document how endless snowfields, extreme cold, darkness, and silence affect human perception and emotional stability. Ancient travelers likely experienced similar pressures intensified by permanent uncertainty and the absence of external rescue. Loneliness inside such environments becomes almost unbearable. The group provides emotional anchoring against landscapes vast enough to erase ordinary human scale entirely. One lesser-known detail emerges from studies of ancient Arctic survival. In extremely cold climates, simple tasks become communal necessities. Clothing must be maintained constantly because damaged gear can mean death through exposure. Fires require shared fuel gathering. Hunting large northern animals demands coordinated labor. Even sleep becomes collective defense against freezing temperatures. Bodies survive partly through proximity, and still the migration continues. At some point, groups move farther south beyond the great ice sheets and enter ecosystems untouched by humans before. Forests dense with unfamiliar prey, river systems extending thousands of kilometers, open plains crowded with giant animals. Within surprisingly short periods, human populations spread across enormous portions of the Americas. The speed remains astonishing even now. Scholars still debate exactly how rapidly this expansion occurs, but what survives in the archaeological record suggests extraordinary adaptability. Humans reach deserts, mountains, grasslands, tropical forests, and coastlines within a relatively brief span of deep time. Such movement requires more than courage. It requires stable social systems capable of carrying knowledge into entirely unknown environments. Because every new landscape creates fresh uncertainty. Which plants are edible? Which rivers flood dangerously? Which animals migrate seasonally? Which predators threaten camps? Ancient hunters entering unfamiliar territory cannot rely entirely on inherited environmental memory anymore. Instead, groups begin building new knowledge collectively through observation, experimentation, and survival itself. This process is risky. Mistakes in unknown ecosystems can prove fatal quickly. Poisonous food sources, hidden terrain hazards, unstable weather patterns, and unfamiliar animal behavior all threaten newly arriving populations. Groups traveling together reduce these risks by distributing experimentation across many individuals. Information spreads rapidly inside cooperative networks. And the frozen crossings are not humanity's only great migration. Across different eras, humans move through deserts into Arabia, island chains into Southeast Asia, mountain corridors into Europe, and coastlines stretching across the Pacific. Each expansion presents unique environmental dangers, yet similar social patterns emerge repeatedly. Collective travel, shared memory, cooperative survival. Ocean crossings reveal perhaps the clearest example of this principle. Even relatively short sea journeys in prehistoric conditions are profoundly dangerous. Storms destroy fragile watercraft. Navigation errors strand travelers permanently. Fresh water becomes limited. Yet humans repeatedly cross open water long before advanced technology appears. Reaching Australia tens of thousands of years ago likely requires intentional sea travel over visible horizons. Nobody drifts accidentally across such distances in large numbers. These voyages demand planning, coordination, trust, and social organization capable of sustaining terrifying uncertainty. Once again, the human story advances not through isolated heroes, but through groups willing to face the unknown together. Some scholars believe migration itself shapes human psychology deeply over evolutionary time. Curiosity, adaptability, social bonding, and emotional resilience may all strengthen, partly because mobile populations repeatedly reward such traits under unstable conditions. The evidence remains complex and incomplete, but movement clearly becomes central to human identity long before settled civilization emerges. Still, every migration carries loss alongside discovery. Groups leave behind familiar landscapes, burial places, seasonal routes, and accumulated memory tied to older territories. Some traditions survive the journey, others disappear gradually as environments change. Ancient travelers crossing into new worlds are not only explorers, they are also refugees from ecological pressure, climatic instability, conflict, or dwindling resources elsewhere. And behind every successful migration lies the constant threat of failure. Storms or starvation, injury, isolation. A single separated traveller may vanish silently into frozen emptiness without leaving trace. But groups endure because collective systems absorb shocks that would destroy solitary individuals. Knowledge survives when carried by many minds. Children survive when protected by many hands. Fear remains manageable when shared around common fires beneath hostile skies. The people crossing the northern icefields tonight cannot know that their descendants will someday fill continents stretching far beyond imagination. They only know the immediate realities before them: cold wind, heavy burdens, dangerous ground beneath uncertain light. So they keep moving close together through the frozen silence while the old world disappears slowly behind them. The hunger begins quietly. At first it is only smaller portions beside the fire, fewer scraps left after butchering, longer distances between successful hunts. Hunters return exhausted more often, carrying little except cold wind and disappointment. Nobody speaks openly about danger yet because prehistoric people understand how quickly fear spreads through fragile groups. But the tension is already there, moving invisibly beneath ordinary routines like a crack forming deep inside river ice. Soon, everything begins to change. Ancient companionship helps humans survive harsh environments, predators, storms, and migration across unknown lands. Yet the same social bonds that protect groups can also become strained to breaking point when resources collapse. Cooperation is powerful, but it is never effortless. Under extreme pressure, travelling bands face impossible decisions capable of turning allies against one another. The archaeological record preserves only fragments of these moments, but enough survives to reveal something deeply unsettling. Human groups do not always endure hardship peacefully together. Climate instability plays a major role here again. During periods of severe cooling, drought, or ecological disruption, prey populations may decline sharply across entire regions. Rivers fail. Familiar migration routes become unreliable. Plant resources disappear seasonally or permanently. In landscapes already balanced close to survival margins, even small environmental changes can trigger cascading crisis. Groups surviving through collective movement suddenly confront terrible arithmetic. How much food remains? How many people can continue traveling? Should the group divide or stay together? Should weaker members slow migration or be protected at greater risk to everyone else? These are not abstract moral problems discussed in safety. They are immediate survival calculations made under exhaustion, fear, and uncertainty. No single explanation fully accounts for how prehistoric communities handle such crises because evidence remains incomplete and likely varies enormously across cultures and environments. Yet anthropology, archaeology, and environmental history all suggest the same broad truth. Human cooperation becomes most fragile precisely when it is needed most. One haunting example comes from prehistoric cannibalism evidence discovered at several archaeological sites across Europe and elsewhere. Human bones bearing cut marks, marrow extraction patterns, or processing similar to animal remains indicate that under certain conditions, humans consume other humans. Scholars debate interpretations carefully because ritual practices, mortuary behavior, violence, and starvation can produce overlapping evidence. Still, at some sites, severe survival stress likely contributes directly to these acts. The implications are grim. Ancient hunters traveling through collapsing environments may occasionally reach points where ordinary social rules begin disintegrating under overwhelming pressure. Companionship itself becomes unstable when starvation reshapes human behavior biologically and psychologically. Modern famine studies reveal how prolonged hunger alters cognition, emotional regulation, and social trust. People become obsessed with food, conflict intensifies, decision-making deteriorates. Ancient groups facing such conditions without external support systems likely experience similar pressures magnified by environmental danger all around them. And yet, remarkably, many groups still hold together. This may be one of humanity's most extraordinary achievements. Cooperation survives not because conditions remain easy, but because humans repeatedly develop emotional, cultural, and social mechanisms strong enough to resist collapse even during catastrophe. Burial practices sometimes continue during periods of hardship despite the enormous energy costs involved. Injured individuals are still cared for. Food sharing persists beyond immediate kinship ties in many societies. The evidence suggests that humans often cling more tightly to social bonds precisely when environments become most dangerous. But not always. Violence inside groups likely emerges more frequently during prolonged stress. Archaeological skeletons occasionally show injuries consistent with interpersonal conflict rather than warfare against outsiders. Defensive wounds, blunt trauma, embedded weapons. Some deaths may reflect arguments, leadership disputes, competition over resources, or panic during crisis periods. Travel magnifies these tensions because escape becomes difficult. In permanent settlements, hostile individuals may leave or separate geographically. Mobile bands crossing harsh landscapes often lack that option. Everyone depends on everyone else for survival, while simultaneously enduring exhaustion and fear together day after day. Emotional pressure accumulates relentlessly. One lesser-known detail appears in ethnographic accounts from extremely harsh environments such as Arctic or desert survival cultures. Groups sometimes develop strict behavioral expectations specifically designed to reduce panic and preserve cooperation during scarcity. Complaining may be discouraged. Food distribution follows rigid tradition. Emotional restraint becomes survival discipline. Ancient hunters likely evolved similar systems long before written law exists. Because panic can kill entire groups. Imagine a winter migration during severe prey collapse. Snow deepens unexpectedly. Children weaken from hunger. Hunters fail repeatedly. Every decision now carries life or death consequences. Should the group continue forward, hoping for better territory ahead, or conserve energy where they are, should injured members be carried further, slowing everyone down? The emotional burden of such choices is almost unimaginable from modern safety. And sometimes groups fracture completely. Archaeologists occasionally identify periods where human populations seem to disappear temporarily from certain regions before later returning. Climate stress, resource depletion, conflict, disease, or migration failure may all contribute. Entire social networks vanish without leaving detailed explanation behind. The prehistoric world contains countless silent collapses no surviving story can fully recover. This fragility shadows even humanity's greatest expansions. Modern people often view prehistoric survival retrospectively, knowing humanity ultimately spreads across the globe successfully, but ancient travelers possessed no such certainty. Every migration may fail, every winter may become the last. Every group lives close to forces capable of erasing them entirely. Perhaps that is why companionship becomes emotionally sacred across so many later cultures. Shared meals, ritual obligations, hospitality toward travelers, burial traditions, kinship loyalty, collective mourning. These practices may preserve deep evolutionary memories of how essential social cohesion once was, under conditions where isolation often meant death. Yet there is another uncomfortable truth buried inside this history as well. The same instincts driving cooperation inside groups can intensify hostility toward outsiders during scarcity. Hunger narrows empathy, fear sharpens territorial behavior. Ancient alliances may collapse rapidly when survival resources shrink. Some prehistoric massacres likely emerge partly from environmental pressure, forcing desperate competition between neighboring populations. Human beings are capable of extraordinary compassion and extraordinary violence, often under the same conditions. The line between cooperation and collapse remains painfully thin. Tonight, beside the dying fire, the group eats in near silence. Snow drifts against temporary shelters while cold wind moves endlessly across the dark plains beyond camp. Everyone understands the danger now, even if nobody speaks it directly. Supplies are failing. The herds have not returned. Children are already weaker than before. Still, they remain together. Because ancient hunters know something modern people rarely confront so clearly. Survival is never guaranteed, not by intelligence, not by strength, not by courage alone, only by the fragile decision, repeated again and again through fear and hunger, to keep moving beside one another despite the growing darkness ahead. Even now, the fear remains. A modern person walking alone through deep forest at night may suddenly feel their pulse quicken, for reasons difficult to explain logically. Every distant sound seems sharper. Darkness appears heavier than it should. The mind begins inventing movement in shadows where nothing visible exists. Rationally, the danger is often minimal. Yet the body reacts as though something ancient has awakened beneath conscious thought. Perhaps it has. For hundreds of thousands of years, isolation in unfamiliar landscapes genuinely increases the likelihood of death for human beings. Predators, exposure, injury, starvation, and hostile encounters make solitude dangerous across nearly every prehistoric environment. Ancient hunters survive partly because companionship becomes embedded deeply into human biology, psychology, and culture. The echoes of that adaptation still shape modern minds long after the world itself has changed. Scientists studying loneliness today increasingly describe it not simply as emotional discomfort, but as a biological alarm system. Prolonged isolation alters stress hormones, sleep quality, immune function, emotional regulation, and even perception of threat. Human brains become hypervigilant when separated from supportive social networks. In evolutionary terms, this response makes sense. For prehistoric humans, isolation often signals immediate vulnerability. The body learns to treat separation itself as danger. What feels irrational in modern life may once have been highly adaptive. This ancient inheritance appears everywhere. Children instinctively seek proximity to trusted adults when frightened. People across cultures gather together during storms, disasters, and uncertainty. Shared meals create emotional stability beyond simple nutrition. Mourning rituals emphasize collective grief rather than solitary suffering. Even modern cities, despite anonymity and crowding, remain built around dense social structures. Humans continue depending on psychologically. The prehistoric fear of being left alone never fully disappears. Folklore preserves it vividly. Across countless cultures, stories warn against wandering alone into forests, mountains, deserts, or unfamiliar wilderness after dark. Travelers disappearing beyond the safety of campfires become recurring themes in myths, stretching across continents. Predators transform into monsters. Unknown human threats become spirits, raiders, or supernatural beings lurking beyond settled territory. Scholars debate the origins of many such traditions. But beneath cultural variation lies a remarkably consistent emotional pattern. Isolation invites danger. One striking example appears in ancient and medieval European folklore surrounding forests. Woods become associated with wolves, spirits, exile, madness, and transformation. Travelers losing pathways in darkness encounter terror not merely because forests are physically dangerous, but because they represent separation from human protection and orientation. Similar themes emerge globally. Desert cultures warn against solitary crossings. Arctic traditions describe deadly wandering spirits tied to storms and isolation. Maritime folklore fills empty seas with creatures attacking lone sailors. These stories are not random inventions detached from reality. They encode emotional truths shaped by long histories of environmental vulnerability. Modern horror still relies heavily on the same ancient architecture. Characters separated from groups become vulnerable first. Darkness intensifies fear, communication breaks down, familiar pathways vanish. Predators, human or otherwise, approach from beyond visibility. Even audiences living safely inside technological societies respond instinctively because the emotional foundations remain deeply human and extremely old. The body remembers what civilization often tries to forget. There are subtler echoes too. Humans instinctively form temporary social bonds in uncertain environments. Strangers trapped during storms, disasters, or dangerous travel often cooperate rapidly despite no prior relationship. Psychologists studying emergency behavior repeatedly observe spontaneous mutual aid emerging under threat conditions. Ancient survival systems still activate beneath modern identities, and companionship changes perception itself. Experiments show that people estimate hills as less steep, pain as less severe, and threatening environments as more manageable when trusted companions are nearby. Social connection literally alters how humans experience physical reality. Ancient hunters crossing hostile landscapes likely benefit constantly from these effects without understanding the underlying biology. Companionship reduces fear not through illusion, but through shared survival capacity. This may explain why exile remains such a powerful punishment historically. From ancient banishment practices to solitary confinement in modern prisons, forced isolation consistently produces severe psychological distress. Human beings evolved expecting continuous social proximity under dangerous conditions. Separation feels threatening because, for most of history, it often was. Yet modern life creates strange contradictions. Many people now spend large portions of existence physically safe but socially fragmented. Urban isolation, digital communication, and individualistic culture sometimes separate humans from the communal structures ancient minds evolved within. Loneliness becomes widespread even inside crowded societies. Some researchers suggest this mismatch contributes to rising anxiety, depression, and chronic stress in modern populations. The evidence remains complex and debated, but the broader idea is compelling. Human psychology may still expect forms of companionship shaped during prehistoric survival, long before industrial civilization emerges. Even recreational behavior reflects ancient patterns. People camp together, hike in groups, sit around fires telling stories, gather during meals despite abundant food security. Travelers instinctively form communities in unfamiliar places. Families cluster closely during sleep when frightened. These behaviors often feel emotionally satisfying beyond practical necessity because they resonate with extremely old survival systems. The fire remains especially powerful. Across cultures worldwide, humans continue gathering around controlled flames for comfort, conversation, ritual, and emotional connection. Campfires reduce anxiety in measurable ways even today. Perhaps somewhere deep inside human memory, firelight still represents temporary safety against surrounding darkness. And the darkness itself still carries weight. Modern artificial lighting has altered human experience dramatically within only a tiny fraction of evolutionary time. For most of human history, night means limited visibility, uncertain threats, and dependence on group protection. Some fear responses linked to darkness may therefore reflect ancient adaptive caution rather than irrational weakness. Ancient hunters likely never fully relaxed outside the security of collective camps. Someone remained awake. Someone listened for movement beyond firelight. Predators circled unseen. Rival groups moved through darkness. Storms approached silently across open land. Human beings evolved inside that tension. One lesser-known detail from neuroscience research reveals how deeply social humans truly are. Simply hearing familiar voices can reduce physiological stress responses during threatening situations. Touch, eye contact, and synchronized movement all affect emotional regulation profoundly. Ancient travel constantly reinforces these mechanisms through shared labor, collective vigilance, and physical proximity. The group becomes part of the nervous system itself. Perhaps that is why archaeological discoveries of isolated prehistoric deaths feel so emotionally haunting even now. A lone skeleton in frozen mountains or empty desert touches ancient fears embedded inside collective human memory. Separation from the group once meant exposure not only to physical danger, but to existential vulnerability older than recorded history. Tonight, somewhere in the modern world, a person walks alone beneath trees while instinct quietly sharpens every sound around them. Far away, city lights glow against the horizon, but the body responds as though the ancient wilderness still surrounds it. Because in some ways, it does. The old fears survive beneath civilization like footprints buried under layers of time, waiting for darkness to reveal them again. The footprints vanish into water. Along an ancient shoreline now buried beneath the sea, people once walked together carrying tools, children, memory, and fear across wet sand that no longer exists. Waves eventually erased their tracks. Rising oceans swallowed their camps. Storms scattered their fires into darkness long before history began recording names. Yet for a brief moment, somewhere between movement and disappearance, human beings crossed the edge of an unknown world side by side. Most of them are gone without trace. This is perhaps the strangest truth hidden beneath the story of ancient hunters. Humanity spreads across continents, survives predators, outlasts climate collapse, crosses frozen land bridges and deadly deserts, and slowly transforms the planet itself. Yet the overwhelming majority of those lives leave almost nothing behind. A fragment of bone, a chipped spear point, a faint hearth buried beneath sediment, sometimes not even that. The prehistoric world is filled with absences. Entire migrations vanish from the record, languages disappear completely, rituals, songs, alliances, fears, and personal memories dissolve into silence. Archaeology reconstructs fragments carefully from scattered evidence, but no single explanation fully recovers the emotional reality of what ancient humans experienced moving through dangerous landscapes together for hundreds of thousands of years. Still, enough survives to reveal the shape of something extraordinary. Again and again, across different continents, climates, and periods of deep time, human survival depends on companionship, not merely cooperation during hunts, not merely temporary alliances, something deeper. Ancient hunters build entire ways of life around the understanding that isolation is dangerous, while collective movement increases the odds of survival against overwhelming environmental pressure. This principle quietly shapes the human future. Long before cities appear, humans already master shared memory, coordinated labor, emotional regulation through social bonds, collective childcare, environmental adaptation, symbolic identity, and trust systems extending beyond immediate family groups. Civilization does not invent cooperation. It expands foundations laid beside prehistoric campfires under open skies filled with predators and uncertainty. Even the modern world still rests on these ancient structures. Roads replace migration trails. Nations replace small traveling bands. Digital networks replace some forms of face-to-face exchange. Yet human beings continue relying on collective knowledge systems, emotional communities, and social trust in ways rooted far older than written history. The scale changes. The biology underneath remains surprisingly familiar. Archaeology keeps uncovering new glimpses of this hidden inheritance. Footprints preserved in volcanic ash reveal children running beside adults thousands of years ago. Healed injuries show strangers or relatives carrying one another through suffering long enough for bones to recover. Shared tool traditions spread across immense territories indicate networks of teaching and memory impossible for isolated individuals alone. Ancient camps reveal repeated returns to familiar places generation after generation, as though humans are stitching themselves into landscapes through movement and remembrance. And always, the group remains central. Some of the most haunting discoveries are also the simplest. A child's footprint beside an adult's in drying mud. A burial carefully arranged despite harsh conditions. Evidence of food shared among many people after dangerous hunts. A fire maintained through long winter nights. These fragments feel emotionally immediate because they reveal continuity rather than distance. Ancient hunters are not alien beings living disconnected from modern humanity. They are recognizably human in their fear, dependence, attachment, and determination to protect one another against a world that often seems far too large and hostile. Yet there are mysteries archaeology may never fully solve. How many groups disappeared entirely during failed migrations? How many ancient pathways now lie submerged beneath oceans or buried beneath glaciers? How many acts of compassion, betrayal, courage, or sacrifice vanished without leaving material trace. The prehistoric record preserves survival unevenly and often accidentally. Whole worlds are missing from it forever. Perhaps that absence matters. The silence surrounding ancient humanity reminds modern people how fragile memory truly is. Entire populations once walked landscapes now erased from existence. Rivers changed course, forests vanished, ice retreated, seas rose. The earth itself repeatedly transformed while humans adapted together as best they could. And through all of it, companionship remained one of the few constants. When storms destroyed familiar trails, groups rebuilt orientation collectively. When predators circled camps, multiple watchers stayed awake through darkness. When children weakened during migration, others carried them forward. When elders remembered lost pathways, younger generations listened. Human beings survived not because fear disappeared, but because fear became easier to bear beside others. This may be the deepest lesson buried inside the long story of ancient hunters. Strength alone is rarely enough. The prehistoric world favors memory shared across generations, labor divided among many hands, and emotional bonds strong enough to resist hunger, cold, uncertainty, and grief. Humanity's greatest adaptation may not be intelligence in isolation, but intelligence woven socially into groups capable of surviving together where solitary individuals would fail. The vanished footprints along the ancient shore are gone now beneath dark water. No names remain attached to them. No surviving story tells where those travellers hope to go. But somewhere in the pattern of those lost steps lies the foundation of nearly everything human civilization later becomes. Because before cities, before kingdoms, before written language and organized history, there were small moving circles of people crossing dangerous landscapes side by side beneath unfamiliar stars. And almost nobody walked alone. The fire is quieter now. Beyond the reach of surviving memory, the ancient world continues slipping further into darkness with every passing century. The camps are gone. The hunting trails have faded beneath forests, deserts, farmland, and rising seas. Snow covers the old migration routes. Rivers flow through valleys where human voices once echoed beside temporary fires at the end of long journeys. Yet traces remain in unexpected places. A handprint on cave stone, a broken spear point buried beneath frozen earth. Footprints hardened in ancient mud for tens of thousands of years before sunlight touches them again. These fragments survive almost by accident, small interruptions in the enormous silence surrounding prehistoric humanity, and still they are enough to reveal something enduring. The ancient hunters crossing those dangerous landscapes were never fearless. They feared storms, predators, starvation, darkness, strangers, and the vast emptiness waiting beyond firelight. They understood how quickly a single injury or wrong decision could end a life. They watched companions disappear into snowstorms, floodwaters, forests, or distance. They carried grief with them from one season to the next. But they also carried one another. Children slept beside shared fires while elders remembered hidden pathways through changing worlds. Hunters returned from frozen plains carrying food for people too weak to travel further. During long nights beneath unfamiliar stars, human beings survived partly because someone remained nearby listening for danger in the dark. The landscapes changed constantly. Ice advanced and retreated. Forests rose and vanished. Coastlines drowned beneath the sea. Entire species disappeared from the earth. Yet generation after generation, humans kept moving together across the uncertainty. Perhaps that is why the story still feels familiar now. Modern life often creates the illusion that survival is individual, controlled, separate from ancient dependency. But somewhere beneath cities, technology, and electric light, the older memory remains, the instinct to gather during fear, the comfort of familiar voices in darkness, the quiet understanding that even in a changed world, human beings endure hardship more easily beside one another. Far back in time, beside rivers that no longer exist, small groups once disappeared into distant horizons, carrying everything they needed on their backs and inside their shared memory. Most of their names are lost forever,